Hi, everybody. We're so happy to be with you. I'm Thom Stecher. I've got three wonderful, brilliant friends with me today. Jessie McFarland, Abby Morgan, and Krista Leh. We're going to chat a little bit about opening school. And I know that is a topic that's on everyone's mind right now. And we're going to literally get to the heart of the matter. For all of us, we need to build relationships with our children. We need to build relationships with each other. Jim Comer, Dr. James Comer from Yale University has a famous quote that I love. No significant learning occurs without first a significant relationship. Please read those words slowly. No significant learning. Significant learning is learning that lasts a lifetime. Significant learning is that stays with us and becomes part of who we are, part of our character, part of our makeup for the rest of our lives. It drives and helps us make decisions. It helps us stay safe. It helps us be the best human beings we can be. And those learnings do not happen without first a significant relationship. So as we move into this school year, we know that every one of us, as educators, principals, counselors, special ed, regular ed, support staff, every one of us is critically important to the health and well-being of our children. We're critically important to the social emotional learning of our children. And we are critically important to the academic development of our children. My friends and I are going to dialogue about many different perspectives as we enter the school year. But no, we start with relationship and reminding us what Dr. Brene Brown says. We are hardwired for relationship. We are hardwired for connection. So we need to find a way, whether we enter the school year virtually, whether we enter it personally, or whether we enter it in a hybrid fashion, we need to find a way to make connection and develop relationships. My friends and I are driven by the theory and the research of the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, CASEL, CASEL.org. And that theory and that relationship looks at 5 competencies, 5 human skill sets and abilities that we must have to be successful in this arena called humanity, and absolutely successful in the world of education. CASEL does not give us an order of priority. They say all 5 are equally important. I believe, and I think my friends might agree, that we must start with self-awareness. Self-awareness is that intra-personal skill. I look inside of myself. Now, as soon as I say those words, I pause, because I have to pause to look inside of myself. My dear friend Jessie McFarland, who you will be hearing from in a moment, is a master in mindfulness. And so many of our friends in schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, are bringing mindfulness practice into the daily experience. So I need to slow down. I need to pause. I need to be mindful so that I can become self-aware, so that I can identify my emotions. And my dear friends, I've been thinking so much about you as I hear from school districts all over the country. How will we open? Will it be in person? Oh my goodness, that produces so much anxiety right now. Will it be hybrid? How will we do that? And my friends in administration have been working feverishly the past month. Or will we go back to all virtual? And you've absolutely worked hard, and I believe brilliantly, this past spring. And some of us have even done summer programming, so we have more experience with the virtual world. But we all have to focus on how will we go back and how do we feel about that. I saw a post from a veteran educator today reminding us that even though we have a variety of feelings, we have a responsibility to meet the children where they're at, not to deny our feelings, but to remember that we are the adult, we are the role model, we are the person that can modify our feelings. We can adjust our feelings in the moment we are with those children, helping them to be the best that they can be. As we focus on self-awareness, we look at our perception of the world. And there's so much going on now. As Jessie and then Krista talking about diversity and equity, and Abby talking about trauma-informed care very shortly, we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's so important to our children today. And we're going to need to help them sort that out, because our children are coming from an exquisite diversity of families. And all those families have different conversations. And all those conversations evoke different feelings. And we are often in education the safe place where children get to have that conversation and sort out those feelings. And so as we gain a sense of our awareness of who we are and how we feel, we then continue intrapersonally into self-management. Knowing to control my impulses. Every time I walk in the morning with my mask on, because my family needs that. Myself at 68, my wife at 71, we're in a high risk group, but I really do it because of my daughter, who I love so much. And she's immunocompromised, she's medically fragile. She's developmentally 2 months old in her 36-year-old body. As I think of her special needs, I think of your special needs. Because there is not a human soul on this planet right now that doesn't have a special need. And we need to find a way to manage those various impulses that in me want to shout out, "Wear your mask, please." And knowing, although I don't understand, I admit that to you, why someone might not want to do that. I'll listen. I want to understand. Helping our children manage all that stress. I mean, Jessie teaches a stress management course. It's a 45-hour graduate course. We're going to have to help our children and our colleagues manage that, not the first day of school, but even before that, as we communicate to parents and children and colleagues. And as we focus on those two intrapersonal skill sets, we pause and begin to say, okay, if I have some focus there, if I have some equilibrium there, I need to look outside of myself now. And there's so much going on outside of me, outside in my neighborhood, outside in my school district, outside in my world. And social awareness, taking perspective and understanding how I earned my perspective. You see, my set of glasses, my prescription, was born and raised in a farming family in Burlington, New Jersey. And we learned about taking care of a larger community other than our biological family. That's how we were raised. And that's the perspective I still have today. And in that perspective, I learned about empathy, literally feeling with another person. And then my dear friend Krista has taught me so wonderfully lately in the past few months that we must move from empathy to compassion. That's empathy in action. That's really doing something. So whether I'm giving out lunch food this summer for those children and families that need it, whether I'm walking in the Black Lives Matter movement, whether I am speaking out to my colleagues and saying, please wear a mask because I care about you. And I want us all to be here tomorrow. Social awareness, there's nothing more personal today. It's every one of us. It's every teacher, it's every administrator, it's every child, it's every parent, it's every person in a elder care community. It's every little one in a preschool. It's everyone in a summer camp. And it's all those families and children who can't go to any of that because they don't have the resources. And so I've always thought our primary job in school was to be aware of ourselves and be aware of each other and to build relationships, to build relationship skills. And that's the other external skill that Castle brings us, learning to communicate and remembering that I only have one voice, but I have two ears. I'm supposed to use these 50% more. And fully engaging with other human beings. That means being vulnerable, being real, authentic and transparent. And I hope it means being all those things with kindness and respect and caring. And helping our children build a team. Helping us, as Jessie will comment, to build that classroom and that school community. And when we have these four, and we've worked on them and built them in ourselves and each other, the theory and the best practice of social emotional learning says, now I can make responsible decisions. Now, with an understanding of myself and an understanding of you, and an understanding that we are together in this world. When I am faced with a concern, I can first identify the problem. What's going on here? I need to understand that. And Jessie is a science teacher. She's a science educator. So this looks very familiar to her because this is almost synonymous with the scientific method. And we're working on this with the coronavirus right now. My oldest son is in a lab right now in the Princeton area doing just this. What's the problem? You know, why can't we find proper testing? Why can't we find a cure? Well, this virus is complicated. And us human beings are complicated. So we need to analyze different situations and take them in a context. You know, when Krista and I talk about somebody saying, well, why Black Lives Matter? Don't all lives matter? Absolutely all lives matter. But today, the context is the violence and the hatred and the racism and the oppression against the Black women and men and children and families that have been going on for 600 years of history. So we must put our science and put our problem solving and decision making into the context Generalities do not serve us right now. And as we work on those problems, we evaluate. Was this effective? Was it not effective? And we're doing that in school right now, and you'll do that the first week. What's working? You do that academically, and we'll do that socially, emotionally. And then we will reflect, and we all do that every night. You know, I would tell my graduate students that we need to start every day with mindfulness and reflection, and we need to end every day with mindfulness and reflection. So I want to get my friends in here and start a dialogue. Jessie McFarland, middle school teacher, science teacher, mindfulness educator, nutrition educator, stress management educator, wellness educator, brilliant, brilliant woman. Jessie, you've started the school year many, many times. You've started with those middle school kids that I always found challenging. I'm good with high school, but I don't want to go near middle school. So tell us, my friend, what are your thoughts on starting this school year?
Thank you, Thom, for that really kind introduction. We decided through this conversation that we wanted to lead with the 5 competencies as almost an invitation to kind of lean into that whole broad spectrum, that holistic approach to social emotional learning, and how that needs to be the forefront of any school year. But I think you can agree that even more so this school year. Your kiddos are going to be coming to you with a sense of uncertainty. Their school situation, no matter where they are, is not going to look, sound, or feel like anything they've experienced up to this point. From a brain standpoint, you know, their amygdala, their guard dog, is going to be barking from the second they walk either into the doors or enter that first, you know, Zoom or whatever digital virtual space you're going to create for them. And so it has to be a priority for every single one of us to look at their well-being and where they are. Give them the permission to feel the way that they're feeling. I always think about the power we have as educators to choreograph and create a space for kids to be kids, to have courageous conversations, to enter into a story, to be able to feel like they have the ability to be 100% themselves. And so how I used to do that, and this isn't, at Thom Stecher, we talk about a lot the full value contract, and Krista uses this all the time, but this is something that I used to utilize in my middle school classroom. And here's what I think is going to be the most important about creating norms in your classroom at the very beginning. In the past, before I started taking some courses and kind of diving into social emotional learning pretty in depth, I had a tendency to kind of give my expectations in the start of the school year and expect my students to just receive them with open arms. And if you think back to a full value contract and which is essentially like what your rules and expectations are, they're receiving that from multiple teachers in the same day usually. And so by the time they go home, they might have 80 some expectations that we expect them to uphold. And in my classroom, it might be you walk in the door and you sit down and you do now. But in Krista's classroom, it might look like you need to meet and greet the teacher and the homework bin is over here. And we have to give grace to our students and recognize that that first priority needs to be a shared vision that includes their voice in what they need from you as well to feel safe, supported in your classroom. So a full value contract would be something like a shared vision. I love using the idea of shared vision of what do each individual person, what do they need, allowing them to dialogue and have a conversation about it. Really, when you are just explaining your rules, that's called passive learning, and it's not getting absorbed anyway. So really, passive only moves to active when students enter a conversation. Do not be scared to have your children enter conversations, dialogue about things that are important to them, voice what they specifically need. And from an equity standpoint, which Krista can identify for you and kind of talk a little bit more, this is so important because not every need is the same. And then together create what will this virtual classroom look like so that all of us can feel welcome, all of us can feel like this is a space that we can thrive. Or this socially distanced classroom, what can I do? Because some of your kids are going to be so fearful to touch anything. Think about it. We've been sanitizing them and we've been, putting these precautions into their brains, and then we're sending them to a situation where they're going to have to be somewhat social with people who aren't in their bubble. So think about the fear and the amygdala that's happening right there, and allowing them to voice, this is what my family did and how I feel safe right now in this current situation. And they need to be able to communicate that in a way that's heard and listened to and not judged, because we are all coming from this from different viewpoints. So the full value contract, Tom, when you ask like, how would I start my class, my school year, it is first kind of laying that groundwork of emotional safety, physical safety, and what we need in order to support each other, and being able to offer that feedback. And feedback, when we talk about in terms of the learning environment, is being able to advocate from a standpoint of growth. Like, in order to grow, we need to be able to offer people feedback. But in this scenario, it could be feedback on what I need to feel successful and safe. And then the last step of that is the let it go piece. And Abby just threw this up here for you, which is amazing. But that's that idea that when our ideas of how something should work and flow isn't exactly what I have in mind, but that ability to be able to compromise with others and learn that this is a shared experience, and we need to let go some of those ideas that we have in order to help everybody as a collective group feel safe. I don't know if, Krista, you wanted to add a little equity lens to that one piece.
I think you hit on it there. Thank you. Is that having an understanding that all of your students are going to have different needs based on their experiences. That ties in with be able to speak your truth, but honor other people's truths as part of that shared experience. And equity is difficult for students to grasp and understand. They're so used to being told that fairness is equality, where everybody gets the same thing, but that's not the way that life is, and that's not what is best for everybody. And so even just using a phrase for students and say, if one of you has a paper cut, I'm going to give you a Band-Aid. I'm not going to give out Band-Aids to everybody in the class, because that's not what everybody needs. So as we open this space to share about what we need, need to be mindful and to take into consideration that we all have different needs, and that as the teacher, as a facilitator of this shared experience, I'm going to ensure that you all get what you need. And so you're going to see that not everybody's going to have the same thing.
And I think as well, coming from a trauma-informed lens, a full value contract gives a roadmap to expectations. And for students who, and in this situation, we all have experienced trauma. For students who have experienced trauma and they have also been in their homes for the last however many months, which is where maybe that trauma has happened and has continued to happen, walking into a space where they are given voice as well as given expectations and being prepared for what my day will look like. And that is something that will help those students find some normalcy. And Jessie talked about the amygdala being on high alert. For students who have experienced and adults who've experienced trauma, that's that toxic stress where the amygdala is fired and on high alert at all times. Helping our students build self-management skills and have a self-awareness of when that amygdala is fired. And I know, Jessie, you like to do the brain flipping your lid, yes, to show where that amygdala is. Having that full value contract really perpetuates the need for students who have experienced trauma to have some self-management skills and have an understanding that we as a classroom and we as a community are agreeing to these things that are going to keep all of us emotionally safe.
So let me piggyback on emotional safety. Jessie, is there any, for you, tried and true activity that allows you as the educator and the children working together to build relationship or connection? Is there anything that you really love to do the first day or two of class?
I think we're all kind of familiar with the typical icebreakers. In this situation, I have to tell you that I've been doing a lot of programming virtually, and you know, we were trying to rack our brains of what do all these icebreakers look like in a virtual setting, and how are we going to create connection and meaningful connection. And I honestly feel like it all comes down to that choreography of conversation. And I know that sounds so simplistic, but when you allow any human being, it doesn't matter if you're 4 or you're 50, to be with other human beings and share a piece of their story with each other. That is the fastest way to, one, find a shared humanity, because there is so much more that we have in common than we have different, and to celebrate and acknowledge each other, and then to be able to share that and highlight that in others. So in a virtual setting, we do this in something called like a breakout room or a paired interview, and just literally creating a time, like even if it's a 10-minute conversation, for them to connect using a prompt, a high touch prompt that you're creating to help that classroom community kind of start to establish, and then allowing those feel good feelings. As a facilitator, you are highlighting and like lifting those feelings up. So they have that conversation, and you immediately tap into that emotional response. How do you feel right now? And they're gonna say, I guarantee, the word connected, understood. And those words, as a facilitator, you hear those and you highlight them, and you say you feel connected and understood because you just had a shared experience with another human being who is part of our classroom community. And that's just the simplistic version. I mean, if you think about the root of every icebreaker we do, it's involving some type of bingo where you're learning something about somebody, or you're using Skittles to say, name 5 things. What's your favorite animal? What's your favorite? And it's really just our way to introduce conversation. So I ask you to kind of take a step back, and in your own self-awareness and self-management, think about the questions that your specific students need to hear the most. It is insane the power that a question can create for an atmosphere in your classroom. We've seen it time and time again throughout these last few months. So don't just ask a question to ask it. Think about right now, what is that one thing that you think will allow your students to express their most, important information about themselves that they want others to know. So that's kind of.
Jessie, I've had the privilege of being a participant as you have facilitated that conversation, and the power of story, and allowing folks to share some of their story, to share some of their life, and then, as you have just shared with us, explicitly asking to tap into those emotions. So I want to shift over to Krista now. Krista Leh, if I have a school district that needs work with diversity and equity anywhere in North America, I'm calling Krista Leh. I've had the privilege of knowing Krista and being friends with her for quite some time now. I'll never forget the moment we first met, and that workshop that we were doing, and you asked some version of saying, I want to do this. And you have been doing it, first in high school and now all across the country as a consultant in social emotional learning and diversity and equity. Krista, pick up Jessie, pick up from our friend's story and diversity and equity.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Thank you for that introduction. And not only have we met, but you have mentored me over the last 12 to 15 years that we have been together. And I'd like to build upon what Jessie said, with the power of story allows us to fill the perceived space that we have between us. Sharing story allows us to take away the assumptions that get filled into that shared space by our socialization processes in society, are the media, the news stories, the television shows, our family stories. And so when we get up close and we have that opportunity, like Jessie said, we get a chance to see that we have so many more similarities, and we learn to honor our uniquenesses. And I loved what she said about how powerful questions can be. And I would offer 2 things. One is to really reinforce the power of open-ended questions, especially where students can't just say yes, no. It digs in and it allows them to open up. And from a diversity and equity perspective, we know that one of the most powerful things that can happen to us as humans is to feel that we're seen and to feel that we're valued. And when we first are introduced to people, we as teachers for our students and as students to students, we want to say, teach me who you are. Teach me your name. Tell me how you want to be referred to. Do you go by a nickname? What are your pronouns? Tell me how to connect with you in a way that is respectful to you and that honors you. And so if we model that as teachers on the very first day, instead of trying to pronounce names that we're not sure of or not not giving names the honor that they deserve, because even thinking about how names get passed down in my family, middle names, thinking about the agonizing hours I spent over naming my own children and how important that was to me. Names are honoring and names have value. And so teach me how to pronounce your name. Teach me your name. Tell me your pronouns. Tell me how I can honor who you are when you're in my classroom. And when we invite those conversations between students, get them comfortable and used to also saying, teach me about you, teach me your name. How can I help you feel connected and valued and accepted?
So Krista, here we are, not only in the middle of the coronavirus, which brings enough anxiety, but we are also right in the middle of Black Lives Matter. And for me, the civil rights movement in the 60s was part of my life. And now here we are again. And for me, as an older man, I'm hoping it sticks this time. What do we need to do in schools?
I think one of the first things we need to look at is inward. You mentioned the intrapersonal pieces. So often we want to turn outward, and how can we fix students sometimes as a mentality, or how do we fix education? But we need to start with ourselves, because we also have direct locus of control. Having an understanding of who we are, what our identity is, how we perceive ourselves, how we manage ourselves, what our triggers are, and being able to communicate that in what do I need in this learning environment, and how can you keep me accountable to meeting your needs, that we are part of that learning community that Jessie talked about. And reading as much as we can, asking our students, tell me who you are, tell me what's important to you. I often like to use the I am from poems, where you ask students to write about, tell me what's important in your home life, tell me who is important to you, tell me what products and movies and sounds and foods and smells are important to you, and how can we leverage those meaningful pieces of a student's culture and a family's culture in the learning environment to create rich, relevant, and meaningful educational experiences for them.
So you mentioned I am from poems. And earlier, Jessie gave us some examples about how to start the school year. And Jessie reminded us how important relationship is. You are also emphasizing getting to know yourself as well as getting to know your students. And I've seen you facilitate and lead the I Am poem. And in a school district here in southeastern Pennsylvania, somewhere this past winter, there was a brilliant young man who shared a poem that is worthy of publication.
Absolutely.
You want to talk about that experience at all?
Sure. We were working with a diverse group of students. There were about 100 of them in the room, and we had asked them to reflect on and create an I am from poem. We gave them a very structured poem that was kind of a fill in the blank, or we gave them some, think about the sounds, the sights, the foods, the smells, the products, the sayings that you hear, and you can create the poem however you want. And we asked them to turn and to partner with somebody next to them. And we had a student, he said, "May I speak and share my poem with everybody?" And I said, sure, let me like learn about you and your poem. And I said, you absolutely need to share this with people. And he was sharing his perspective of life as a young Black man, and what that meant in his community, and what that meant in the school system, and what he was led to believe that was going to be for the rest of his life. And it was so incredibly moving. And as educators, it's a powerful way to get to know your students and who they are. And along with that, what I would recommend is, as a team of teachers, whoever you most commonly work with, ask the students to do this one time, or ask the students to do a survey on who they are one time, and have all of the teachers have access to that. So that the student is not doing the same survey or a similar version of the survey 6 times. Have one central connecting point of family and students that all teachers can access. And I also feel very strongly, and I learned this from you, Thom, that don't ever ask a student to do something that you're not willing to do. So as part of that shared community, like Jessie said, you are also responsible and should model the way for your students. And so when I ask groups to do that, I also share my I am from poem with them.
Beautiful, beautiful. So for our listeners, I just heard not only from Jessie, but now from Krista, whether our focus is building a classroom community, whether our focus is diversity and equity, they are intertwined. And we just had some beautiful examples of how to become known and how to get to know our children and our students. And I would recommend to all our adults out there, also superb ways for staff development. Also great ways we get to know each other as adults. My other friend here, you've heard from briefly, Abby Morgan. Abby is the program manager for everything we do at Thom Stecher and Associates across the country. I am, quite honestly, professionally, I can't make a day without her. She's an absolutely brilliant woman, organized, incredibly talented, comes from a past experience as a interscholastic college coach in lacrosse. So she knows discipline, she knows managing people, she knows motivating, uplifting people. And not only does she do that for me, but she does that for all of our team across the country. And Abby's expertise is in trauma-informed care. So again, here we are in the middle of not a national crisis, a global crisis. And at the moment of this recording, the United States of America is not doing too well. We're in a lot of pain. We're in a lot of pain, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and absolutely a lot of trauma. And now we layer on top of that Black Lives Matter, where trauma is in our televisions every single night. Abby, talk to us about trauma-informed care, particularly as we prepare to start this school year and then as we start this school year.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it, as did all three of us. He's very good at introductions. Very good. Very good at a lot of things. Very good at introductions. I think one of the things that we haven't discussed yet, and this is actually a good time to talk about it, is that we've talked about a lot about what we're doing for our students. We need to remember that we need to do these things for ourselves as well, as educators, before we walk in the building, but also this is our time within this summer to prepare ourselves, prepare our self-awareness within an equity lens, within a trauma lens. Make sure that we have all of those resources that we need to be able to reduce our stress, which is that self-management piece. If we're able to prepare ourselves within these topics, within social emotional learning, our stress, and we all know that we have tons and tons of stress on what this year will look like. So just a reminder that we need to do these things for ourselves. And we have experienced trauma, and as educators, not just within the pandemic and within the cultural sense, we all come from a different story, and we may have all experienced trauma in our different ways. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and so that we can be the best for our students. So the trauma piece is something that starts with a simple paradigm shift. And that is from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And this is a simple, when people talk about trauma-informed care and trauma-sensitive schools and just any iteration of that word, it really comes back to this. And our students' behavior, our behavior within our families and the adults in our lives, instead of that, why did that person do that? And what's wrong with that behavior? Why, switching that to, why might that behavior be showing itself in my classroom? And a student is throwing a chair. Most of the time is not about me at all. It's about what happened to that student. So coming out of this time of the coronavirus, of the Black Lives Matter movement, trauma is thinking about trauma through that lens of what happened to you this summer and how has that maybe changed your experience coming back into school. And what are our students coming in within their backpack, and what can we do as teachers to not have that backpack explode? And really, trauma-informed comes back to building relationships. So again, comes back to social emotional learning. It takes one caring adult to help a student heal from trauma. The trauma will never go away, but to heal and to be able to exist in our classroom, in their lives, in a bit of well-being, it starts with having that one caring relationship. So that relationship skills, that communication, helping a student tell their story might be a little bit tougher for a student who has experienced trauma, because telling their story may be telling their trauma. So how can you, as an educator, make sure that those questions you ask are sensitive? And if you have developed a relationship with a student who has experienced trauma, whether you know it or not, that's another thing. Thom, you talked about the coming into a situation, trying to help. When it comes to trauma informed, you don't know what you don't know about that student. They may have experienced trauma and you may never ever know it. So you have to come into that building assuming that everyone has experienced trauma and have that sensitivity that comes with building relationships. And you may never know what that trauma is. And that's something I think that a lot of teachers struggle with when they learn about adverse childhood experiences and the ACEs quiz and the background about how trauma affects development and the brain and your neurons not connecting when you've experienced trauma, all the research behind that. Teachers want to know what happened. What was that trauma that happened to that student? Why aren't my counselors telling me what that trauma is? I need to know. And when you pull that back, we really don't need to know. We just need to treat our students with respect. We need to develop relationships with them so that we can help them be successful the way that they are successful, the way that they see success. And we don't need to have them tell us what their trauma was. And I think that's a really important, once you learn about what trauma is and how it affects our brains, our bodies, how it affects us over a lifetime, our instinct as educators is to know what it is so that we can help. And that is one of those situations where we just have to, we may not ever know it, but we need to make sure that we are sensitive to it and treat all of our students in a way that is sensitive to what they may have experienced.
I want to ask each of you a question. It's the same question. I'd just love to hear your perspective. I lose track of how many years I've been doing this. I think it's 47 or 48. And almost the entire time when we talked about social emotional learning, trauma, diversity and equity, or whatever language we used way back then, invariably then and now someone will say, well, they'll either say, I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm afraid I'm going to do the wrong thing. I'm afraid, or that's not my job, which I think is kind of a mask for I'm afraid. What would you, because we all know, all of us care so much about our friends in education. What would you say? You've probably done it. You've probably said it. What would you say to our friends out there? Oh, I don't know what to do. I might do the wrong thing.
I mean, I think, Abby, you pointed out something that my passion is on educator well-being and wellness and that self-care piece for educators. And I think that the more self-awareness you have as an educator, leading with your heart, doing the work on yourself so that you can model these things that you're asking your students to embody and be. When you can take care of yourself, it's the only way that you can take care of other people. And so when you said, Tom, like, what do you say to an educator who is afraid? I think that is a self-awareness. Where does that fear come from? Yeah. Unpacking that and digging a little bit deeper into that, because that is an emotion and that's a valid emotion. But when you do the work around that emotion, what you discover, I think, would serve you so well with how you work with kids. So I would say that would be my advice.
Thanks, Jessie.
And I have two different responses because I see those as two different approaches, right? So when somebody says, I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing, my first instinct is, yes, you will. And so will I. We are human. And that's a natural part of the learning and growing process, is that we are going to say the wrong thing. And we need to not let that stop us, that fear of messing up stop us. But when we do say the wrong thing, when we do make a mistake, it's drawing upon our social emotional learning skills and making amends. So when we talk about relationship skills, oftentimes we talk about building relationship skills, but we don't, in my opinion, spend enough time talking about what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like to sustain those relationships. Because I used to think you made a relationship and it just went forward. And in my early adult year, I realized, like, it's still up and down. And so we need to understand that we are going to make those mistakes, and it's what we do after those mistakes that is incredibly important, and what we need to be focusing on to kind of pick ourselves back up. I have admittedly a little bit of a harder time with that's not my job, because at the base of it, our jobs are to prepare our students to help them learn, live, and lead in this world beyond 12th grade, whatever they decide that to be. And so social emotional learning is a piece of that. They can have all of the content knowledge in the world, but if they can't communicate that, if they don't know who they are and how to work with other people, they're not going to have as successful a life as they would. And so I respectfully say that is part of your job, and it needs to become part of your job. And if not, maybe there's a way you can use your skill set that you're bringing to the table in education in a different type of environment that is better suited.
When we find ourselves in that fear, it's always good to go back to why you are here and why you are in education. And Tom, you always ask 3 questions when we have our initial professional development with staffs. And one of them being, what is essential to the teaching and learning process? Another is, what is your responsibility in that process? And I think that question, we end up getting so many of the same responses wherever we go. And would you say, Tom, across the country, wherever you go?
Absolutely, yes.
The responses are always the same. And I think that question brings educators back to why they got into this profession and where that passion, that grounding comes from. And we all are going to run into that stress. And that stress may come out as, well, that's not my job. When we come back to what is our grounding of why I'm an educator, most of the time it comes back to, we want to help kids. And our job is to help kids. So what part of not my job is helping kids in any way, shape, or form that they are coming into our space? So I think when it comes to diversity and equity, when it comes to trauma-informed care, when it comes to any part of social emotional learning, it is easy and too simple to say, that's not my job. That's the counselor's job. That's the principal's job. That's not my job as an educator in my classroom. And I think that is a short-sighted view of why we are here as educators, why we became educators in the first place. And that is to help kids. And I think there's another piece to this as well, is that you are part of a larger community, and that community, we all see how stressed our colleagues are. If we collectively as a community take on some of those things that we see as outside of our job, especially our counselors, can we help them? Can we help our principals so that then they can help us as colleagues? We've heard a lot of, we're all in this together, but we all need to do our part to be in it together. If we are not putting ourselves forward to help that cause, then we are not in it together. We are not a community. So I think that that's an important piece to make sure that we are giving of ourselves so that we can receive from others within our community.
I'm very grateful for this time together. We're going to bring this to a close with a question that may sound strange. It won't sound strange to any of you because you know I come up with strange things all the time. I'm going to ask you to think about leadership. And I'm going to ask you to imagine that I put you in charge of a school district and you have to open up that school district this year. We have all dear, dear friends who have that job in real life right now, who are opening up a school district. And we have great compassion for our friends. So whether it be one word or one sentence, I just want you to really hone in. Really hone in. What's the message? If a staff's in front of you, the children are in front of you, and families are in front of you, in this time of turmoil like I've never seen before in my 68 years, what's your message, Jessie McFarland?
I feel like I went first last time. I'm passing the torch and we're going backwards. Krista, start first.
Fair enough. Abby, Krista, what do you got?
Ready.
I'm ready. My message would be connection over content. Our kids are going to be okay. They're going to be okay. If we focus on building them as lifelong learners, they will be fine. But we need to connect with them and not push content or feel that they missed something last year and make that our priority. Connection.
Love it. I love it. I champion that, my friend. Abby?
My one word would be breathe. I think every single teacher, administrator, student needs to take a breath and know that this situation we are going into is impossible. It's impossible. We cannot do it right within what we have at our disposal. So as I'm stealing from Jessie, give ourselves some grace. Did I steal? Breathe. And also make sure that as educators, we are giving our students time to breathe so that we can do what we came to the building to do.
I love it. Thanks, Abby. Jess?
Going all the way back full circle to that full value contract, there's a piece at the very end that talks about teaching students the power of letting go. And I think that for so many of us as educators, we've been doing things a specific way for so long, and we love so much how we start a school year and these activities that we do, and that ability to pivot and let go and maybe be open to the possibility that something new and different and unique might be uncovered, whether it be you as an educator because you're forced to use resources that you've never had to tap into before, or your students who are going to have to be creative with the way that they're going to learn and absorb information. Maybe allow all of the expectations to kind of go to the wayside for a moment and just be present and be creative and be able to stay curious and reinvent alongside your classroom community. And that collective power, I think, could be really, really special.
Thank you, Jessie. I'm going to piggyback on my three friends. Believe in the strength of vulnerability. There is great, great strength in you and I being real. And that includes being vulnerable. And speak your vulnerability and speak your truth. And let us all be human together. Thank you for listening. Thank you for my friends for helping us with this. Abby will put some contact information at the end. We'd love to visit with you. We'd love to help you. Be well, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.